The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop as wind howled through the mountain pass, and Nora Preston knew with absolute certainty that she had made a terrible mistake coming west to marry a man she had never met. Snow hammered against the wooden sides of the coach with such force that the entire vehicle shuddered, and through the frosted window she could barely make out the shapes of the horses as they stamped and whinnied in terror. The driver's muffled shouts were lost in the roar of wind, and Nora clutched her carpet bag tighter against her chest, feeling the cold seep through her wool traveling dress like water through paper. She had left Philadelphia 3 weeks ago with high hopes and desperate circumstances, answering an advertisement from a rancher named Marcus Thompson, who sought a wife to share his life in the Idaho Territory. The letters they had exchanged over the past 4 months had been polite and practical, discussing expectations and responsibilities rather than affections or romance. Marcus had written that he needed a capable woman who could manage a household and help with the ranch work when needed. Nora had written that she needed security, and a fresh start after her father's death had left her penniless and at the mercy of her brother's shrewish wife. Neither had mentioned love, which suited Nora fine because she had long since stopped believing in such things. The coach door flew open and the driver's weathered face appeared, snow clinging to his beard. "We cannot go any further, miss. The road is completely blocked and the horses will not move. Malad City is still 5 miles ahead, but there is a ranch house just over that ridge. We need to get you there before we all freeze to death." Nora nodded, too cold to speak, and allowed the driver to help her down from the coach. Her boots sank into snow that came nearly to her knees, and the wind immediately tried to tear her bonnet from her head. She had never experienced cold like this, not even during the worst Philadelphia winters. This was a living, vicious thing that bit through fabric and flesh to gnaw at her very bones. The other passenger, an older man traveling on business, had already started trudging through the drifts toward what Nora hoped was the ridge the driver had mentioned, though she could see nothing but white in every direction. "Stay close together," the driver shouted, taking Nora's elbow to guide her forward. "The ranch belongs to Marcus Thompson. We are in luck because he is the very man you came to meet." The words should have brought relief, but Nora felt only a spike of panic. She was not ready to meet her future husband like this, half frozen and bedraggled, arriving unannounced in the middle of what appeared to be the worst blizzard in recorded history. She had imagined meeting him at the stage depot in town, where she would have had time to brush the dust from her dress and compose herself into the image of a capable, dignified woman worthy of being a rancher's wife. Instead, she was stumbling through waist-deep snow, her face numb and her hands so cold inside her gloves that she could no longer feel her fingers. The climb over the ridge took what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. By the time they crested the top and saw the dark shape of buildings in the valley below, Nora's teeth were chattering so hard she feared they might shatter. The ranch house was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure built of logs with several outbuildings clustered nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney only to be immediately torn away by the wind, and warm yellow light glowed in the windows like a promise of salvation. They half walked, half slid down the slope toward the house. Nora fell twice, the carpet bag flying from her numbed grip, and each time the driver had to haul her back to her feet. The business traveler reached the house first and began pounding on the door with both fists. By the time Nora and the driver arrived, the door was already swinging open. The man who stood in the doorway was tall and broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the warm light from inside. He took one look at the 3 half-frozen people on his porch and immediately stepped back. "Get inside, quickly now." Nora stumbled over the threshold and nearly collapsed as the warmth of the house hit her like a physical force. Her legs would not hold her, and she felt herself falling, but strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. She found herself looking up into a face that was ruggedly handsome in a weathered, lived-in way, with deep lines around blue eyes that were currently filled with concern. A dark beard covered his jaw, and his brown hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. "I have you," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle for such a large man. "You are safe now." He carried her to a chair near the massive stone fireplace and set her down carefully, then immediately began removing her sodden gloves. Nora tried to protest, but her mouth would not work properly, her lips too numb to form words. The man, who she assumed must be Marcus Thompson, rubbed her hands between his own large, warm ones, bringing painful circulation back to her fingers. The driver was helping the business traveler to another chair, and both men were talking in low, urgent tones about the storm and the trapped stage coach. "We need to get the horses to shelter," the driver was saying. "They will not survive the night in this wind." "I will help you," Marcus said, still working on Nora's hands. He looked down at her with those steady blue eyes. "Can you hold a cup if I bring you something hot to drink?" Nora managed a jerky nod. Marcus disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen and returned moments later with a steaming mug of coffee. He wrapped her stiff fingers around it, and she felt the heat seep into her palms. The first sip burned her throat, but she had never tasted anything so wonderful. Marcus pulled a heavy blanket from the back of the sofa and draped it around her shoulders, then checked that the business traveler was similarly situated before pulling on his own coat and hat. "There is more coffee on the stove and bread and cold meat in the larder if you need food," he told them. "I will return as soon as we have secured the horses." Then he and the driver went back out into the storm, and Nora was left sitting in her intended husband's house, dripping melted snow onto his floor, and trying to process the fact that her entire life had just changed in the space of an hour. She looked around the room through the steam rising from her coffee cup. The house was well built and surprisingly neat for a bachelor dwelling. The furniture was simple but well made, the floor swept clean, and books lined a shelf on the far wall. A rifle hung over the fireplace next to what appeared to be a painting of mountain scenery. The room felt lived in but not neglected, masculine but not harsh. The business traveler, who had introduced himself as Mr. Thornton during the stage journey, removed his spectacles and began cleaning them with a somewhat dry corner of his vest. "Well, miss, it seems you have arrived at your destination after all, if somewhat earlier and more dramatically than planned. That was Marcus Thompson, I assume?" "I believe so," Nora said, her voice still shaky, "though we have not been formally introduced." "Circumstances rather precluded formality," Mr. Thornton said dryly. "He seems a solid sort of man. You could do worse." Nora supposed that was true, though the words rang with the same practical lack of romance that had characterized her entire journey into this marriage. She had not expected romance, she reminded herself. She had expected security and respectability and a place where she belonged. Romance was for silly girls who read too many novels and believed in fairy tales. Nora was 23 years old and had learned the hard way that survival mattered more than sentiment. Still, as she sat warming herself by Marcus Thompson's fire and wearing his blanket around her shoulders, she could not help but remember the gentleness in his voice when he had said he had her, the care with which he had warmed her frozen hands. Perhaps practical arrangements could still include kindness. Perhaps that would be enough. The men were gone for nearly an hour. By the time they returned, stamping snow from their boots in the entryway, Nora had stopped shivering and had consumed 3 cups of coffee along with several slices of bread and butter that she had found in the kitchen. She had also taken the opportunity to explore the first floor of the house, driven by both curiosity and the need to assess what would become her new home. The kitchen was spacious and well equipped with a large cast iron stove and plenty of cabinet space. The parlor where they had been received was the largest room, and there was also a small study lined with more books, and a bedroom on the ground floor that appeared to be used for storage more than sleeping. A steep staircase led to the second floor, but Nora had not felt comfortable exploring that far without permission. Marcus came into the parlor shaking snow from his hair and immediately looked to where Nora sat. "You have better color now. How are you feeling?" "Much warmer, thank you," Nora said, setting down her empty cup and standing. The blanket fell from her shoulders and she caught it, folding it with automatic neatness. "I must apologize for arriving in such a manner. I am Nora Preston, and I believe you are expecting me, though not for another few days." "Marcus Thompson," he confirmed, pulling off his gloves. "And you need not apologize for the weather, Miss Preston. I am only grateful you made it here safely." He glanced at the driver and Mr. Thornton. "The stage is completely snowed in and will not be movable until this storm passes. The horses are settled in my barn. You are all welcome to stay here until the roads are clear." "I will not impose on your hospitality," Mr. Thornton began, but Marcus waved away the protest. "It is no imposition. I have space and supplies enough, and no one is going back out into that storm. Miss Preston can have the upstairs bedroom, and you gentlemen can sleep down here in the parlor near the fire. I have extra blankets and pillows." The arrangements were made with quiet efficiency, and Nora found herself being shown up the steep staircase to the second floor as the afternoon light began to fade. There were 2 rooms upstairs, one clearly Marcus's own bedroom and the other a smaller but comfortable space with a narrow bed covered in a simple quilt. A washstand stood in the corner and a braided rug covered the floor. "This was meant to be a guest room," Marcus said, setting her carpet bag on the bed. "Or perhaps a nursery someday, should God bless me with children." He said it matter-of-factly, but Nora felt her cheeks heat at the implication. Children meant intimacy, meant sharing the larger bedroom across the hall, meant all the things that her marriage to this stranger would eventually entail. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on the present moment. "It is a lovely room," she said. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Thompson." "Marcus," he corrected gently. "If we are to be married, we should use our given names, and you are welcome, Nora. I only wish we were meeting under better circumstances." He left her alone to change out of her damp clothes and rest before supper. Nora sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to fully comprehend the strangeness of her situation. She was in Idaho Territory, hundreds of miles from everything she had ever known, sitting in the bedroom of a man she had met barely 2 hours ago and planned to marry within days. The enormity of it pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. But what choice did she have? Her brother had made it clear that she was no longer welcome in the Philadelphia house that had once been her childhood home. Her father had left debts instead of an inheritance, and as an unmarried woman with no fortune and limited skills, her options had been severely restricted. She could have become a governess or a companion to some elderly woman, living on the edges of other people's lives. Or she could have answered Marcus Thompson's advertisement and traveled west to build a life of her own. She had chosen the latter, and now she had to see it through. Supper that evening was a simple meal of fried potatoes, beans, and bacon that Marcus prepared with the kind of casual competence that spoke of long practice. Nora offered to help, but he waved her to a seat at the kitchen table, insisting she was still recovering from her ordeal. They ate by lamplight while the storm continued to rage outside, the wind howling down the chimney and rattling the windows in their frames. The conversation was stilted at first, but Marcus proved to be a better conversationalist than his letters had suggested, asking intelligent questions about her journey west and sharing stories about the ranch and the surrounding territory. "I have been here for 8 years," he told her, passing the plate of bacon. "Came out from Missouri after my parents died and used my inheritance to buy this land. It was rough country then, barely settled, but I could see the potential. The grazing is good and water is plentiful, and I have built the herd up to nearly 200 head of cattle now." "That is impressive," Nora said, and meant it. She knew enough about ranching from her reading to understand that building a successful operation from nothing required tremendous hard work and business acumen. Marcus shrugged, but she could see he was pleased by her acknowledgement. "I have been fortunate, and I work hard. But it is lonely work, and a ranch this size really needs a woman's touch to become a true home. I am not much for housekeeping, as you have probably noticed." Nora had noticed no such thing. The house was far cleaner and better organized than she had expected for a bachelor dwelling. She said so, and Marcus actually smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something warmer and more approachable. "I do my best, but there is a difference between keeping things tidy and making a real home. I am hoping you can teach me that difference, Nora." The use of her given name sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. There was something intimate about hearing it in his deep voice, something that made this arrangement feel suddenly more real and less like a business transaction. She met his eyes across the table and saw that he was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "I will do my best," she said softly. "I want this to work, Marcus. I want to build a good life here." "So do I," he replied, and the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. Nora woke in the narrow bed to the sound of wind and the strange sensation of being in a completely unfamiliar place. For a moment she could not remember where she was, and then memory returned in a rush. Idaho. The ranch. Marcus. She dressed in her second-best dress, a dark blue wool that had survived the journey relatively unscathed, and braided her brown hair into a neat coronet. When she descended the stairs, she found Marcus already up and the smell of coffee filling the house. "Good morning," he said, looking up from the stove. "I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you," Nora lied. In truth, she had tossed and turned for hours, her mind too full of thoughts and worries to allow proper rest, but she would not complain. Marcus studied her face for a moment as if he could see through her polite fiction, but he did not call her on it. Instead, he poured her a cup of coffee and began cracking eggs into a skillet. "The storm shows no sign of letting up. I checked on the livestock earlier and everything is secure, but we will be housebound for at least another day." Mr. Thornton and the driver emerged from the parlor, and they all ate breakfast together in the kitchen. Afterward, the men settled into various occupations. The driver, whose name was Sam, took out a worn deck of cards and began a game of solitaire at the kitchen table. Mr. Thornton retrieved a book from his luggage and ensconced himself in a chair by the fire. Marcus disappeared into his study to work on what he called his accounts. Nora, unable to sit idle, began cleaning. She started in the kitchen, washing the breakfast dishes and wiping down all the surfaces. Then she swept the floor and reorganized the pantry, taking note of supplies and making mental lists of what would need to be purchased or put up for winter. She moved into the parlor next, dusting and straightening, and then tackled the ground floor bedroom that was being used for storage. She found linens that needed mending, books that should be shelved, and various items that simply needed proper homes. She worked with focused energy, partly because she genuinely wanted to be useful and partly because activity kept her from dwelling on her anxieties about the future. It was mid-afternoon when Marcus found her in the storage room, arms full of quilts that she was sorting by condition. He leaned against the door frame and watched her for a moment before speaking. "You do not need to do all this, Nora. You are a guest, not a servant." Nora turned to face him, clutching the quilts against her chest. "I cannot sit idle and I want to be useful. Besides, if I am to be mistress of this house, I should know what we have and where things are." "If," Marcus repeated, his eyebrows rising. "Are you having doubts?" The question was asked calmly, but Nora heard the tension underneath it. She set down the quilts carefully and met his gaze. "No. I mean, yes, of course I have doubts. This is all very strange and sudden and we barely know each other. But I am not planning to change my mind if that is what you are asking. I came here to marry you, and I intend to keep my word." Marcus stepped fully into the room, his tall frame seeming to fill the small space. "I want you to know that you are not trapped, Nora. If you decide this is not what you want, I will give you money for passage back east, and no one need know you were ever here. I want a wife who chooses to stay, not one who feels she has no other option." The words were kind, even noble, but they struck a nerve. "I do have other options," Nora said, her voice sharper than she intended. "They are simply worse options. I could go back and throw myself on my brother's charity, living as an unwanted burden in his home. I could try to find work as a governess, raising other women's children while having none of my own. I could marry some other man, perhaps one less honorable than you seem to be. So yes, I am choosing to stay, but do not pretend my choices are unlimited." Marcus absorbed her words in silence, his expression thoughtful. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "I did not mean to offend you. I only wanted you to know that I will not hold you to this arrangement if your heart is not in it." "My heart," Nora laughed, though there was little humor in it. "My heart has nothing to do with this, Marcus. This is a practical arrangement between two sensible adults who need what the other can provide. You need a wife to manage your home and give you children. I need security and a place in the world. Feelings do not enter into it." "Perhaps they should," Marcus said quietly. Nora stared at him, startled by the words. Before she could respond, Mr. Thornton called from the parlor asking if anyone wanted tea. The moment broke, and Marcus stepped back into the hall. "I should check on the animals again before dark. We can continue this conversation later if you wish." But they did not continue the conversation that evening or the next morning, when the storm finally began to abate. They were polite and cordial, but there was a new awkwardness between them, as if Nora's blunt words about the practical nature of their arrangement had somehow offended or disappointed him. She told herself it did not matter. She had been honest, which was surely better than pretending to romantic feelings she did not have. But she found herself watching Marcus when he was not looking, studying the way he moved through his home with quiet confidence, the way he treated his guests with unfailing courtesy, the way his hands were both strong and gentle when he handled things. The third morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The landscape outside was transformed into a wonderland of white, with snow drifted against the buildings and icicles hanging from the eaves. Sam announced that he and Mr. Thornton would attempt to return to town, where Sam would arrange to have the stagecoach dug out and repaired. Mr. Thornton had business appointments that could not wait, and he was willing to risk the journey. "What about Miss Preston?" Sam asked, glancing at Nora. "Should she come with us?" There was a pause as everyone looked to Nora and Marcus. They had not discussed what would happen next, had not made any definite plans about the wedding or when it would take place. "That is up to Nora," Marcus said finally. "She is welcome to stay here, or she can return to town and take a room at the boarding house until we can make proper arrangements for the wedding." Nora understood what he was really asking. Did she want to observe propriety and maintain separate residences until they were married, or was she comfortable remaining here under his roof? In truth, the latter was more practical. She had limited funds, and every dollar spent on boarding house fees was a dollar wasted. Besides, they would be married within days regardless. What difference did a few nights make? "I will stay if that is acceptable," she said, looking at Marcus. "We have much to discuss and arrange, and it seems foolish to travel back and forth in this weather." Something that looked like relief crossed Marcus's face. "It is more than acceptable. I will ride into town tomorrow or the next day and make arrangements with the minister. We can be married by week's end if that suits you." "That suits me very well," Nora agreed. After Sam and Mr. Thornton departed on two of Marcus's horses, the house felt suddenly very quiet and empty. Nora and Marcus were truly alone together for the first time, and the awareness of it hung in the air between them. They busied themselves with separate tasks for most of the morning, but after lunch, Marcus sought her out in the kitchen where she was taking inventory of his spice collection. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch?" he asked. "The weather is clear, and it is not as cold as it has been. I thought you might want to understand the full scope of what you are taking on." Nora agreed readily, grateful for something to do and curious about the property that would become her home. Marcus helped her into a heavy coat that he said had belonged to his mother, and found her a pair of boots that were too large but could be stuffed with extra socks. Thus attired, they ventured out into the glittering white landscape. Marcus showed her everything: the barn where the horses and milk cows were kept, the chicken coop where a dozen hens scratched and muttered, the smokehouse and the root cellar, the equipment shed and the bunkhouse that stood empty now but would house hired hands during the busier seasons. He explained the rhythms of ranch life: the spring calving and summer grazing, the fall roundup and winter feeding. He talked about his plans to expand the herd and perhaps add some sheep, about the challenges of the climate and the opportunities in the growing territory. Nora listened intently, asking questions and making observations that showed she was genuinely trying to understand. Marcus seemed to appreciate her interest, and as they walked and talked, some of the awkwardness between them dissipated. When they reached the top of a small rise that overlooked the entire ranch, Marcus stopped and gestured at the vista spread before them. "This is what I am offering you, Nora. It is not much compared to what you left behind in Philadelphia, I know, but it is mine and I am proud of it. I have worked hard to build something lasting here, something that can be passed down to children and grandchildren. I want to share it with someone who can appreciate what it took to create and who will work beside me to make it even better." Nora looked out at the snow-covered buildings and the mountains rising beyond, at the vast expanse of winter sky, and the smoke curling from the ranch house chimney. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, and she could sense the pride and love Marcus felt for this place. It was not what she had left behind, because what she had left behind had never truly been hers. This could be. "I do appreciate it," she said quietly, "and I will work hard to be worthy of sharing it with you." Marcus turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "You are already worthy, Nora. You came all this way on faith, answering an advertisement from a stranger. That took courage." "Or desperation," Nora said wryly. "Perhaps both," Marcus allowed, "but courage nonetheless." They stood together in the cold, their breath forming white clouds in the air, and Nora felt something shift inside her chest. This man was offering her more than security and respectability. He was offering her partnership, respect, and the chance to build something meaningful. Perhaps that was better than romance. Perhaps that could become something even deeper than the fleeting passion celebrated in novels. That evening they sat together by the fire after supper, and Marcus asked her to tell him about her life before Philadelphia, about her childhood and her parents, and the dreams she had once held. Nora found herself talking more freely than she had expected, sharing memories both happy and sad. She told him about her father's bookshop, and how she had learned to love reading by spending hours among the shelves. She told him about her mother's death when Nora was 15, and how she had taken over running the household for her increasingly distracted father. She told him about her father's poor business decisions and mounting debts, about his sudden death from a heart ailment, and about her brother's wife who had made clear that Nora was an unwelcome obligation. Marcus listened without interrupting, his attention focused entirely on her. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "My parents died within a year of each other when I was 25, he said. Cholera took my mother first, and I think my father simply lost the will to fight after she was gone. He died in his sleep 6 months later. They had been married for 30 years and were still deeply in love. I watched them build a life together based on mutual respect and genuine affection, and I decided that was what I wanted for myself someday. When I came out here and bought this land, I thought I would find a local woman to marry, but the nearest town is small and most of the unmarried women are very young or already spoken for. So I placed the advertisement, hoping to find someone practical and capable. And instead you got me, Nora said with a slight smile. Instead I got you, Marcus agreed. And I find myself hoping that we might build something like what my parents had, maybe not immediately, but over time. Partnership and respect can grow into affection, Nora. It does not have to be love at first sight to become real love eventually. His words settled into Nora's heart like seeds waiting for spring. I would like that, she admitted. I have not let myself hope for such things in a long time, but I would like that very much. Marcus reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused from work, and Nora felt the strength in his fingers as they curled around hers. Then let us make that our goal. Not just a practical arrangement, but a real marriage built on growing affection and trust. Yes, Nora said simply, and squeezed his hand in return. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity and growing comfort. Marcus rode into Malad City and met with the minister, arranging for the wedding to take place the following Saturday. He returned with fabric for a new dress for Nora, which she protested was too extravagant until he explained that he had traded beef for it with the shopkeeper's wife who ran the mercantile. Nora spent hours cutting and sewing, creating a simple but elegant dress in deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes. During the days, Marcus taught her the routine of the ranch, showing her how to milk the cows and collect eggs, how to mix feed for the animals and split wood for the stove. Nora proved to be a quick study, and Marcus praised her willingness to learn and her lack of complaint about the hard work. In the evenings, they continued to sit by the fire and talk, learning each other's thoughts and opinions on everything from politics to religion to their favorite books. They discovered shared tastes in literature and similar views on how children should be raised. They laughed together over silly things and debated more serious topics with mutual respect for differing viewpoints. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to fall in love. It was not the dramatic, sweeping passion of romantic novels. It was quieter than that, built on small moments and growing trust. It was Marcus wrapping a shawl around Nora's shoulders when he noticed her shiver. It was Nora mending a tear in Marcus's shirt without being asked. It was the way they had begun to move around each other in the kitchen with unconscious coordination, anticipating each other's needs. It was the way Marcus looked at Nora when he thought she was not watching, and the way Nora found herself listening for his footsteps on the porch. Saturday arrived clear and cold. Marcus hitched his best horses to the wagon and drove Nora into Malad City for the wedding. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with businesses and houses spreading out in all directions. The church was a simple white building with a steeple, and the minister was a kind-faced man in his 50s who greeted them warmly. The ceremony was brief and simple. Marcus had asked Sam, the stage coach driver, and his wife to stand as witnesses, and there were a few other townspeople in attendance who had heard about the wedding and come out of curiosity. Nora stood beside Marcus in her green dress with her hand trembling slightly in his, and repeated the traditional vows that would bind them together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus leaned down and kissed her gently, his lips warm against hers. It was Nora's first real kiss, and though it was chaste and brief, it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. They celebrated with a small dinner at the boarding house, hosted by Sam's wife Martha, who proved to be a cheerful, talkative woman full of advice for the new bride. Several other townspeople joined them, eager to meet the new Mrs. Thompson and welcome her to the community. Nora found herself the center of attention, answering questions about her journey west and her impressions of Idaho Territory. Everyone seemed genuinely friendly, and she began to feel less like an outsider and more like someone who might actually belong here. As evening approached, Marcus helped her back into the wagon for the ride home. Home. The word settled into Nora's mind with surprising comfort. The ranch was home now, truly hers to care for and shape. And Marcus was her husband, the man she would spend her life beside. The reality of it was both thrilling and terrifying. They drove in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and pink. When they arrived back at the ranch, Marcus helped Nora down from the wagon with his hands lingering at her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thompson." The use of her new name sent a flutter through Nora's stomach. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson." "Marcus," he reminded her with a smile. "Marcus," she repeated, and felt her cheeks warm despite the cold. They went inside and Marcus built up the fire while Nora changed out of her wedding dress into something more practical. When she came back downstairs, she found that Marcus had made coffee and set out some of the cake that Martha had sent home with them. They sat together at the kitchen table, suddenly shy with each other in a way they had not been before the ceremony. The wedding vows had made everything real and official, and Nora was acutely aware that this was her wedding night, that Marcus was her husband, that certain expectations now existed between them. Marcus seemed to sense her nervousness. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Nora, I want you to know that there is no pressure. We have the rest of our lives together, and I am content to let things develop naturally between us. Your bedroom upstairs is still yours for as long as you want it." Relief and something that might have been disappointment warred in Nora's chest. She appreciated his consideration, but she also did not want to be a coward. They were married now, and she had responsibilities as a wife. Besides, the truth was that she had grown genuinely fond of Marcus over the past week, and the thought of sharing intimacy with him was not unwelcome, only intimidating because of her complete inexperience. "I appreciate your patience," she said carefully. "But we are married now, and I do not want to put off the inevitable. I am simply nervous because I have no experience in such matters, and I do not want to disappoint you." Marcus's expression softened. He stood and moved around the table to crouch beside her chair so they were at eye level. "You could not possibly disappoint me, Nora, and I promise to be gentle and patient. We will learn together, all right?" Nora nodded, not trusting her voice. Marcus stood and offered his hand, and after a moment she took it and allowed him to lead her upstairs to his bedroom. To their bedroom now, she supposed. The room was neat and masculine, with a large bed covered in a thick quilt and a washstand in the corner. A window looked out over the moonlit landscape, and a fire burned in the small fireplace, warming the space. What followed was awkward at times, tender at others, and more comfortable than Nora had feared. Marcus was true to his word, patient and gentle, and Nora found that her nervousness faded as they learned each other's bodies. There was pain, but it was brief and followed by unexpected pleasure and a deep sense of connection. Afterward, Marcus held her close under the heavy quilts, his arms around her and his breath warm against her hair. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," Nora whispered and realized it was true. She felt changed, marked in some fundamental way as his wife, and the feeling was not unpleasant. "Thank you for being so kind." "Always," Marcus promised and kissed the top of her head. "Sleep now. Tomorrow begins our real life together." Nora drifted off in her husband's arms, feeling safer and more content than she had in years. She had arrived during a blizzard, half frozen and terrified, and Marcus had warmed her both physically and emotionally. She knew now that he would never let her go cold again, not in any sense that mattered. The winter passed in a rhythm of work and growing love. Nora settled into her role as ranch wife with determination and surprising joy. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental stove, to churn butter and make cheese, to preserve vegetables and smoke meat. She took over the garden plot planning for spring, ordering seeds from a catalog and sketching ambitious layouts. She sewed curtains for the windows and hooked a rug for the bedroom floor. She organized the household with efficient precision and kept the accounts in neat columns that made Marcus shake his head in admiration. But more than the physical work, Nora learned to be a partner to her husband. She rode out with him to check on the cattle when the weather allowed, her riding skills improving with practice. She listened to his concerns about the ranch and offered opinions that he genuinely valued. She read his moods and knew when he needed companionship and when he needed space. And she found herself falling deeper in love with him every day. Marcus, for his part, courted his wife with quiet devotion. He brought her small gifts when he went to town, ribbons for her hair, a book of poetry, a packet of flower seeds. He taught her to shoot a rifle so she would be able to protect herself if needed. He consulted her on decisions about the ranch, treating her as a true partner rather than simply a housekeeper. And he loved her with a tenderness and passion that made Nora grateful every day that she had answered his advertisement. Spring came gradually to the Idaho mountains, the snow melting in fits and starts to reveal the brown earth beneath. The cattle moved to higher pastures to graze on new grass, and Marcus hired 2 ranch hands for the season. Nora planted her ambitious garden and tended it faithfully, watching with delight as green shoots pushed up through the soil. The days grew longer and warmer, and life on the ranch settled into comfortable patterns. It was in May that Nora realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first she attributed it to the stress of her new life and the hard physical work, but when a second month passed and she found herself feeling queasy in the mornings, she could no longer deny the truth. She was with child. The realization filled her with a complex tangle of emotions, joy and fear, excitement and anxiety. She was going to be a mother, was going to give Marcus the children he wanted, was going to bring new life into the home they were building together. But she was also terrified of the birth process itself and of the enormous responsibility of raising a child. When she finally told Marcus over dinner one evening, she watched his face anxiously for his reaction. For a moment he simply stared at her, as if unable to process the words. Then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen on him, and he pushed back from the table so abruptly his chair nearly tipped over. "Truly, you are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation," Nora said, unable to help smiling at his joy. "I thought you would be pleased." "Pleased?" Marcus laughed and swept her up into his arms, spinning her in a circle despite her protests. "Nora, I am more than pleased. I am overwhelmed. We are going to be parents." He set her down carefully, suddenly concerned. "Should you be working so hard? We need to make sure you rest enough. I will hire a woman from town to help with the heavier housework." "I am pregnant, not ill," Nora said, amused by his protective reaction. "But yes, some help would be welcome as I get further along." That night, Marcus held her with extra tenderness, his hand resting on her still flat stomach as if he could feel the life growing there. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for coming here, for marrying me, for giving me this gift. Thank you for warming me when I arrived frozen and frightened," Nora whispered back. "Thank you for making me feel like I belong here, like I matter." "You do matter," Marcus said fiercely. "You matter more than anything." Summer brought long days of hard work and the satisfaction of seeing the ranch thrive under their joint stewardship. Nora's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and extras to sell in town. The cattle herd remained healthy, and several calves were born without complication. The hired hands proved reliable and hardworking, and Nora's belly swelled with their growing child, making her pregnancy undeniable. The townspeople of Malad City welcomed the news with enthusiasm, and several women came out to the ranch to visit and offer advice. Martha, Sam's wife, became a particular friend, visiting regularly and bringing gifts of baby clothes and blankets. She helped Nora prepare the upstairs bedroom for the nursery, moving Nora's old furniture out and bringing in a cradle that her own children had used. As autumn approached and Nora entered her 7th month of pregnancy, she found herself both eager and anxious for the birth. The baby moved constantly now, kicking and rolling in a way that was both uncomfortable and deeply reassuring. Marcus talked to her belly in the evenings, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the life they would have. He was endlessly patient with Nora's physical discomforts and emotional fluctuations, bringing her pillows when her back ached and holding her when hormones made her weepy. The baby decided to arrive on a cold October night during an early snowstorm that reminded Nora powerfully of the blizzard in which she had arrived nearly a year ago. The contractions started after supper, at first just mild cramping that Nora almost dismissed. But they grew stronger and closer together, and by midnight she was gripping Marcus's hand and trying not to cry out with the pain. Marcus had ridden to town that afternoon to fetch the doctor, an older woman named Dr. Sarah Winters, who had attended many births in the area. She arrived calm and competent, taking over the bedroom with quiet authority and sending Marcus to boil water and gather clean linens. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Nora had never experienced pain like this, waves of agony that made her certain she would die. But Dr. Winters coached her through each contraction with steady encouragement, and Marcus stayed by her side the entire time, letting her crush his hand and murmuring words of love and support. Finally, as dawn light began to filter through the window, Nora gave one last tremendous push and felt the baby slip free. There was a moment of silence, and then the sharp wail of a newborn filled the room. Dr. Winters held up a small, squirming, bloodied infant with a triumphant smile. "You have a son, Mrs. Thompson. A healthy, strong boy." Nora collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and overwhelmed. Marcus was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as he looked at their child. Dr. Winters cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket before laying him in Nora's arms. Nora looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." "He is beautiful," Marcus said, his voice choked with emotion. "Nora, he is perfect. You are amazing. Thank you, thank you." They named him Matthew after Marcus's father, with the middle name Joseph for Nora's father. Little Matthew Thompson made his presence known from the start, demanding to be fed with lusty cries and keeping his parents awake through many long nights. But neither Marcus nor Nora minded. They were enchanted with their son, marveling over every yawn and stretch, studying his tiny fingers and toes, falling more in love with each passing day. The winter that followed was the happiest of Nora's life. The ranch was snowed in for weeks at a time, but instead of feeling trapped, Nora felt cocooned in warmth and love. Marcus proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Matthew when he fussed, changing his diapers without complaint, and singing him songs in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. The three of them spent long evenings by the fire, Marcus reading aloud while Nora nursed the baby, creating memories that Nora knew she would treasure forever. Spring came again, bringing new life to the ranch and new challenges to meet. Matthew grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, alert infant who smiled at everything and everyone. The cattle herd continued to expand, and Marcus was able to hire more permanent help, building another bunkhouse to accommodate the additional hands. Nora's garden was bigger than ever, and she began selling eggs and vegetables in town on a regular basis, developing a reputation for quality. Life settled into a new rhythm, busy and full but deeply satisfying. Nora still found it hard to believe sometimes that this was her life. A thriving ranch, a devoted husband, a beautiful son, and a place where she truly belonged. When she thought back to that terrified woman who had arrived during the blizzard nearly 2 years ago, she barely recognized herself. That Nora had been cold in so many ways, frozen by loss and fear, and the belief that life was simply something to be endured rather than enjoyed. Marcus had changed all that. He had warmed her physically that first night, and then slowly, patiently warmed her heart and soul until she had thawed completely, able to feel and love and hope again. And true to his unspoken promise, he never let her go cold. Even during their rare arguments, even when life was difficult or money was tight or the work seemed endless, Marcus made sure that Nora knew she was loved, valued, and essential to his happiness. Years passed in a blur of seasons and growth. Matthew was joined by a daughter they named Naomi when he was 3 years old, and then another son named Michael 2 years after that. The ranch prospered and expanded until Marcus was recognized as one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. They built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, adding another bedroom and enlarging the kitchen. Nora's garden became legendary in Malad City, and she started teaching other women her techniques for extending the growing season and preserving the harvest. But more than the material success, what mattered to both Marcus and Nora was the life they had built together. Their marriage had deepened over the years into something far beyond the practical arrangement they had originally envisioned. They knew each other's thoughts and moods with the intimacy of true partnership. They had weathered challenges together, Harsh winters and dry summers, sick livestock and sick children, injuries and setbacks and disappointments. And through it all, they had loved each other with steadfast devotion. On a cold winter evening nearly 15 years after Nora's arrival, the two of them sat together on the porch wrapped in thick blankets, watching the sunset paint the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. Their children were inside doing homework and squabbling good-naturedly over dinner preparations. The ranch was quiet and peaceful, the day's work done. "You remember the night you arrived?" Marcus asked, his arm around Nora's shoulders. "During that terrible blizzard, how could I forget?" Nora said, leaning into his warmth. "I was certain I was going to die, and then you opened the door and pulled me inside. You saved my life that night, Marcus." "I think we saved each other," Marcus replied. "I was so lonely before you came, Nora. I did not realize how much until you were here, and I finally felt complete." Nora turned to look at her husband, seeing the gray threading through his dark beard and the deepening lines around his eyes, evidence of years spent squinting into the sun. He was older now, as was she, but to her he had never been more handsome. This was the face she loved, the face of the man who had kept every promise he had ever made to her. "I arrived frozen and afraid," she said softly. "And you warmed me, Marcus. Not just my body that night, but my heart and my soul. You taught me that I could trust again, that I could hope and dream and build something lasting. You gave me a home and a family and a life beyond anything I imagined possible." "And you gave me the same," Marcus said, kissing her temple. "I placed that advertisement hoping for someone practical and capable, and God sent me you. The best thing I ever did was open my door that night and invite you inside." "The best thing I ever did was stay," Nora replied. They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. From inside came the sounds of their children laughing and the clatter of dishes being set on the table. Soon Martha would call them in for dinner, and the evening routine would begin. The meal, the cleanup, the bedtime rituals with the younger children, the quiet hour by the fire before sleep. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary life, and Nora treasured it all the more for that ordinariness. She had arrived during a blizzard, half frozen and desperate, hoping for nothing more than survival. Marcus had warmed her and given her safety, but he had done so much more than that. He had given her love and partnership and the chance to become the best version of herself. He had never let her go cold, not once in all the years they had been together. And as they rose and went inside to join their family, Nora knew with absolute certainty that she never would be cold again. She had found her home, her place, her person. She had found everything that mattered. The years that followed brought both joys and sorrows, as all lives do. Matthew grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch and planned to take it over someday. Naomi proved to be artistic and spent hours sketching the mountain landscape and the animals. Little Michael was the charmer of the family, able to talk his way out of trouble and into everyone's good graces. They lost a fourth child, a daughter born too early who lived only a few hours, and Nora and Marcus grieved together before slowly healing. They celebrated as Idaho achieved statehood in 1890, and Marcus served a term on the county council. They weathered economic panics and harsh winters and all the ordinary challenges of ranch life. Through everything, their love remained constant. Marcus still brought Nora small gifts when he went to town, still consulted her on every major decision, still held her at night with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding night. Nora still mended his clothes and managed his household, still rode out with him to check the cattle, still loved him more with each passing year. Their children grew up seeing a marriage based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and partnership, and they carried that model into their own lives. When Marcus was 50 and Nora 48, they became grandparents for the first time. Matthew married a local girl named Elizabeth, and they had a daughter they named Nora after her grandmother. Holding that tiny baby and seeing her son as a father made Nora acutely aware of time's passage, but it also filled her with profound gratitude. She had lived to see her children grown and happy, to hold her grandchild, to know that the family she and Marcus had built would continue into the future. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Marcus took Nora back to the spot where he had first shown her the ranch from the ridgetop overlook. It was summer now instead of winter, the landscape green and lush instead of snow-covered, but the view was just as breathtaking. They stood hand in hand, looking out over everything they had built together. 20 years, Marcus said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you arrived during that blizzard, and sometimes it feels like you have always been here. I think part of me was always meant to be here, Nora said. I just had to find my way home. Marcus pulled her into his arms, and Nora rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. This man had been a stranger when she agreed to marry him, but he had become the center of her world. He had warmed her when she was cold, held her when she was frightened, loved her when she felt unlovable. He had given her everything that mattered: home, family, purpose, and a love that had only deepened with time. "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago," Marcus murmured into her hair. "Thank you for getting on that stagecoach and traveling west to marry a man you had never met. Thank you for every day since then." "Thank you for writing that advertisement," Nora replied. "Thank you for opening your door during the blizzard. Thank you for warming me and never letting me go cold. Thank you for loving me." "Always," Marcus promised, the same word he had spoken on their wedding night. "I will love you always, Nora Thompson, until my last breath and beyond." They stood together on the ridge as the sun set behind them, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. Nora had arrived during a blizzard, frozen and afraid. Marcus had warmed her and kept his promise never to let her go cold again. And together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love story that would echo through generations. As they walked back down to the ranch house where their family waited, Nora felt nothing but gratitude and joy. She had been given a second chance at life, and she had seized it with both hands. The practical arrangement had become a great love, the stranger had become her soulmate, and the frozen woman who had arrived in the storm had thawed completely, able to love and be loved with her whole heart. And she would never be cold again.